move my and got my coffee. So everyone's doing well. And welcome to Mahamudra for the people. We can begin with a little bit of sitting meditation. Taking a moment to settle. So allow yourself to let your body relax. And bring your awareness to any of the different ways of anchoring your mind. This can be letting your body, letting your breath just occur as it does, noticing every inhalation and exhalation, where you can focus yourself on a visual, on an object in your frame of reference, so a visual object, or a visualized object. So it could be a Tigle right at your brow, or it could be a Buddha right on the crown of your head. Or it could even be the nature of your mind itself, thoughts coming and going as they do. Whatever it is, allow your body to relax in a gentle way. Give yourself a moment to be free from the three times, past, future, and the present. Giving yourself the opportunity to be free from meaning making, examination, free from control, and let yourself rest like this. And we'll sit like this for 20 minutes. And gently bring yourself back to the group. Okay, so welcome. We're going to continue where we left off. Last time we were sharing some of the ways of cutting through uncertainty, and some of these are through these 11 recollections. So thorough search and analysis, separate analysis, detailed analysis, mental calming, superior vision, or Lactong, mental calming being Shine, combining both clarity, non-thought, equanimity, non-interruption, and non-distraction. We're going to move on from those. All of those techniques are important to have some experience with. They are, in a manner of speaking, well, the kind of topic of that portion of the text is called cutting through uncertainty. And really we can think of these as techniques that obviously do just that, right? These are ways of beginning to kind of address problematic issues that arise, meaning problematic issues that get in the way of recognizing the mind's essential nature. And so, really honestly, thoroughly, and maybe we could also say intimately, relying on these, really try to take your time and feel them. This is it's interesting, there's so much in the world that we can kind of get away with rushing through. Sometimes at work there are certain tasks you can kind of, okay, like I'll just kind of half-ass this a little bit. That's all anybody wants anyway. And we get through with that. Or somehow it all kind of ties up at the end. Or if you're working in a collaborative project with somebody, sometimes there's kind of a little bit of wiggle room, and not to say to be lazy, but to not necessarily have to know the entire nature of a topic that's being addressed in collaborative work. In this case, right, our rushing shows up in the form of missing the mark completely, and I think one way of thinking about this is so all right, this morning I had to mow a lawn, and honestly it was the first time I ever mowed a lawn. There's this kind of little field here in Massachusetts at the retreat center, and it's kind of growing, getting all crazy. And the first run was great. Yeah, I didn't see this nice straight line, but then after a while you can see how everything is wiggly and weird and all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting, lines, if you're set a ruler down and draw a straight line, if your angle's not right, it isn't until you kind of get some distance from looking at this line and you can see how off it actually is, right? And so in a really similar way, if we don't really kind of dissect these kinds of instructions and feel into them and experiment with them, and kind of take them apart and put them back and really get a sense of what it is that they address, then it is very likely that we're kind of fooling ourselves a little bit. And I don't mean to say anybody who doesn't master these are not real meditators. It's more, we have to really understand and remember why we're coming to this, and hopefully it's basically rooted in a recognition of our own suffering and the suffering of others. This is kind of what the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma, which we find at the very beginning of this text, is good for, right? It's a very good honing tool, kind of keep us on point, as it were. Right. So all I'm saying here is, try to be as thorough with yourself as possible. Nobody's going to come and check your work. Nobody's judging, right? This is really just about, really ultimately about mastery, right? If we want to be able to master Mahamudra, which is possible to do, then, getting a deeper understanding of these kinds of techniques help. It's also nice because who's in charge here? You, right? You as the practitioner. This is really like learning any other kind of skill. A lot of skills we can improve on just by repeated practice, right? So this is not the kind of thing where you need to rely on another person to come and give you specific empowerments, or bop you on the head with things, or make you drink different things, right? You don't need another person for this. And this is really nice too. I think this is why these practices are so well suited to long solitary retreat, because really, taking that time to kind of, work through this is really the best way of, absorbing and manifesting this. Of course, all of this kind of extends into this next portion of the text, which is called, it all falls under the rubric of pointing out instructions that to conclude that awareness is emptiness, right? And so this whole point, we don't see this here in this text, but for anybody who's in the Karma Nintik or the Marvelous Guide class, which is on third Karmapa Dzogchen, we'll get into this a little bit later. Rangjung Dorje in that text is kind of funny because he makes some very pointed, remarks about how there's no Ishvara that created the universe, right? There's no God, who did that. And so, and why that's helpful to kind of remember is that, we'll sometimes go there in terms of, saying, well, my awareness is some kind of natural intelligence that was created by some kind of divinity, right? And so this is really like, key thing for people who practice both Mahamudra and Dzogchen, settling into the sense of certainty that there is this kind of union of awareness and emptiness, right? My natural cognizance, which is clear and limitless and luminous, vast, etc., is empty, right? So there's no thing that is doing anything. And this is a very important piece to begin to get under our belt, because otherwise we just kind of end up pumping steroids into self, right? And we get this very kind of intense, me doing, I am so special, I am this, I am the center of the universe, etc. So the Bokrom Che begins this portion pointing out instructions that conclude that awareness is emptiness. In this way, he says, the instructions to conclude that awareness is empty are like this. First, we place the relaxed mind in its own nature, right? So you settle. Well, the good thing about mowing the lawn earlier today is that my body is worn out. When your body is worn out, you settle really nicely, right? So take a moment to allow yourself to settle and rest your mind in its own nature. And this is actually also very interesting too, because what is its own nature, right? So the best way to kind of begin to determine this is to be a very permissive, like permission granting parent, right? Let your mind just do what it does. Don't control, right? The mind is not a well-trained monkey, right? That's not the point here, right? Let it just be. So we, when we can honestly let it be, warts and all, right? So whatever if we're feeling a lot of emotion, or if we're feeling anxiety, or if we're feeling, if we're feeling like totally deadened, right? This means we should rest and relax a little bit, right? So really giving ourselves some time to kind of, essentially with our mind, right? To become friends. But in order to have a relationship that develops into friendship, part of that includes letting that other person just be who they are, right? We don't, I mean, some people may try to do this, like make their friends be what they think they should be, right? But ultimately, part of the rewarding thing about having friends and being in relationships with people like this is to experience people for who they are, right? And so in this sense, we're doing exactly the same thing. Place the relaxed mind in its own nature. Right? So when it is in this relaxed way, then we look at the essence of this relaxed mind in its bare, fresh nature, right? Bare meaning it is all able to be experienced or ascertained. And as we do this, we rest into this one-pointed awareness that is simple and not distracted. Simple here also means not intense. Right? So we're not like bursting a blood vessel in our brain because we're straining. Right? We're watching. Right? Like all of the birds here. There's so many different kinds of birds. And I'll walk out of the door and they watch me and I watch them. But I just watch the mind this way. Whatever thoughts arise, we do not reject or intentionally accept or keep them. Right? So we're being very, I guess you could say, impartial. And I think it is okay to use the word curious, right? So there's this impartial curiosity. We do not mentally create anything when we do this, but rest vividly and openly in this experience of ordinary mind. And in an instant, with clarity, we rest beyond identification. Right? So we're not labeling, right? We're not obsessing. And much like just letting the weather be what it is. So this is a lot like a doctor putting their finger on a pulse or listening to your chest with a stethoscope. This is just really this practice of gaining insight. And then there are additional ways of pointing out the nature of one's own mind, right? Or pointing out that our awareness is empty. So before I introduce those though, the kind of fundamental point of this is for each person to be able to see. Well, let me ask, where do your thoughts come from? If you have them. There wasn't somebody who'd put them there. Right? There was no Ishvara who was like, I'm gonna make you think what you think. And sometimes the more we're able to rest into this experience, oftentimes the thoughts seem to evaporate a little bit. And there's an experience of clarity, expansiveness. Where is that? Is that, does it stop 2 feet from your body? Or is it beyond space like that? What are the, or we could say, what is the symptomology associated with resting like this? And so how are you able to track this in the way your body feels? How are you able to track this in relationship to how you're showing up in relationship to exterior phenomena? How do you track the way this feels in relationship to emotions? And so everybody has the capacity to do this practice. And to some extent, everybody's experience is a little different at first because we're all stacked a little differently. Our minds are a little different. There are some people who have a lot of meditation experience in which sometimes the settling is able to happen very quickly. But our body also kind of, needs to be taken into consideration too. If, for example, let's say you suffer from high blood pressure. If you suffer from high blood pressure, right, then thinking actually can be a little fast, right? There can be kind of emotions that come with this too, right? So the point is not to say, oh, anybody who has high blood pressure can't do this practice. It just means take care of your body. The same thing if one has pushed their body to the limit, doing whatever, and you're tired. And you say, but I still have to sit down to practice. And when you do, you're just like dull and, it's like there's thick, dirty lenses that you're seeing through. You can't really see anything clearly. Your mind feels fuzzy. Hey, no problem. Take a nap. Relax. And so this practice of Mahamudra is really a commitment to be able to open up to this interplay between body and mind. And there ought not be a single shred or ounce of judgment if you need to stop and take a nap or adjust. The same way you could go for a long walk, and if you notice that your knee hurts, maybe you should slow down. But if you're like, oh, no, 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 I'm going to power through, then you might have some problems later. It's a very flexible, I think. So these additional ways of pointing out are this, start with the pointing out through movement. And so this way of pointing out through movement is experienced through letting your mind settle in its own nature in a relaxed way. So just settling. When we've achieved an experience of, settled, easeful clarity, then we look directly into the essence of the mind to experience. And then we create movement in the mind. And so we all sorts of ways of doing this, thinking a lot of things. Thinking about something that is a little bothersome, right? You don't need to go traumatize yourself, right? But if, just think of all the things you need to do this month before the month is out. Right? And then you start making lists or start asking yourself, why did I commit to all these things, right? Whatever. And if we're too settled, then create more. Imagine going outside without your cell phone. This happened to me the other day with my kids. I had to go to a Staples, like a stationery store. And I realized I didn't have my phone on, and I was joking with the person at the cash register, saying it felt like I didn't have pants on. Right? So doing this kind of like, try to make yourself a little uncomfortable, right? Not in an overly intense way, but just that enough to cause this to happen, right? Thinking. And when that, reeling of thought has happened, then looking at what then is the difference between the moving mind and the stable mind. What is the difference between the moving mind and the mind that observes it? And when we observe like this, usually movement becomes liberated. And we're able to dwell without distraction, with one pointed attention or awareness in this state. And then again, remembering that this is not necessarily, maybe this won't happen the first time or the 10th time, but, slowly, slowly, capacity builds. So for example, like watching the mind as you walk down the street, running an errand in a crowded place, where there's a lot to just, make sure you don't get hit by a car, all the things you need to do to make sure you return home from your errand alive and in one piece, right? So there's a lot going on, right? But you can also remain focused while you do this, right? Focused on the mind. Do not cross the street when cars are coming, but you also don't need to get so wrapped up in reminding myself. Or driving. There's a lot to keep track of while you're driving. And yet you can also rest in the nature of mind while you do this. Right? All of the activity of looking in the various mirrors, calibrating pressure of your foot on the accelerator pedal. All of it, there's so much data coming in. Right? And just because it's coming in doesn't mean that we're distracted. And so really breaking into this, or breaking it open. And I'll also say, probably dispelling a lot of myths that have been created over time by really bad meditation instructors. or people who don't necessarily have a lot of understanding of their own mind who are teaching meditation. We can learn everything we need from our own mind. Now, this is what Milarepa did. Years and years and years and years and years. And getting him every day by getting irritated with himself from time to time, a little desperate from time to time, a little lost from time to time. But the good thing about all of those experiences is that there's really, it's like a mirror is being held up in front of oneself. It's very easy to blame circumstances for the thoughts that are coming in our head. But, even if there are people that did things that caused our mind to do whatever, right? Most of the times, those people didn't intentionally do those things to cause disturbance in that way. And even if they do, right, what's the fastest way of diffusing the situation? Right, liberating sound, liberating mind. So in another text, by Takbotashi Namgyal, this book, Elizabeth Callahan translated like the most recent version of this translation of this text, called Moonbeams of Mahamudra. There's another older translation by I can't remember his name now, but I think Trungpa wrote like the introduction to the first translation. But in any event, in that text, right, there's some really good additional kinds of instructions for these kinds of things where you ask a friend to come and kind of say nasty things to you, right? And then you sit and you watch your mind, right? And you ask a friend to do it because your friends, usually know how to get under your skin, how to piss you off a little bit or a lot. Right, and so they, lob these insults, and then just look. But of course, this is something we could do everywhere, right? Anywhere where we feel attraction to things, in February, right before that retreat in Portugal, my family and I had this opportunity to go to Barcelona, and there's this incredible food market there that I actually didn't even know about until we got there, and then I saw it, and it's just like every possible thing. Right, so the first thing when you walk through the main entrance, kids loved it. It's like all these sweets, right? Chocolates and dried fruits and things like that, and seafood and cheeses and eggs, different kinds of eggs. It's just like a plethora. It's just such an amazing thing. And even if you don't want to eat everything, the presentation of it all is so incredible. And it just causes a lot of sticky eyes, right? And so go to a place where your eyes get sticky, where you become very curious and enamored. And so then the next technique is called pointing out through appearances. And so pointing out appearances is mind. And so again, we settle our into the experience of the nature of mind. And then we examine whether the forms or other supports of objective perception are experienced with the mind or if they're different. And so there's a window that I can look out, and there are lots of little birds, different kinds, right? Are those different than me? Is their mind separate from mine? This is a hard one, I think, but it's worth kind of leaning into. Because in so many ways, we've created this idea of me and myself, right? And everybody else. And there are some people we don't want to be, oh, no, 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 we're not going to identify here, you know? Um, People with like Trump flags on their lawn or something like this, or some kinds of sounds that we don't want to be around, some kinds of smells, right? And so really getting curious about the nature of appearance. Like, what is appearance? What is appearance in relationship to my experience of mind itself, of awareness? We hear over and over again about interdependence, right? And this begins to kind of crack that open a little bit. And you hear these stories, like I'm slowly transferring all of my like Dharma books here, very slowly. I don't have a lot of them here, but there's this one I like to pick up every so often that has stories of the 16th Karmapa, and he's just kind of incredible. And there are several stories of him, and he's sitting having breakfast by himself, and is it like there are people in the background, and all of a sudden he like bursts out laughing, and people are like, "Oh, Your Holiness, like what, is everything okay?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, 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 back in Sikkim, so and so just spilled their tea all over themselves because they were rushing." And this is like, these stories happen when he was like traveling in Europe or the United States. And then, lo and behold, when they returned to Sikkim, the monks talked to, you know, the person who spilled their tea and said, "Oh, Karmapa said this happened." He's like, "Oh my God, it did." So when we begin, this is a really helpful instruction for getting into this much more spacious relationship to appearance and the nature of awareness. Right? And this aids us in realizing that all objects which externally appear have no existence and arise yet as reflections of our mind. And as we train in this, we just gently come back to it again and again and again, resting into a state of awareness without fixation on the nature of appearance. Another good place that this intersects with are our kind of strange ideas about things. I still maybe we'll go to Hart Island to bless all the bodies that are brought there, the city's Potter's Field. And every so often I'll meet people from the community who are curious about that place. And a lot of people, I mean, maybe I don't know if it's a messed up place, right? But it could be a tragic place. But sometimes I meet with people and they say, that's a horrible place. That's a terrible place. Is it? It's just a place. Who makes it horrible? And what is the nature of this horrible appearance? Yeah, and this makes me think a little bit of the Mahasutta Luipa, who was famous for eating fish guts. This is all he ate. But he began to do this when he was sitting in meditation on a riverbank and he was watching a fisher person gut a bunch of fish that they caught. And he was like, ew, that's gross. And the moment he realized, he's like, oh, now I know what I need to do. Start eating these fish guts, right? To really, who's the problem here? Are they the guts? I mean, the guts are dead, right? They're not doing anything. They can't get up and walk around and like thumb their, fingers at you. They smell the way they smell. They didn't decide to smell that way. They taste the way they taste. They didn't decide that. And so then the next is pointing out mind as emptiness. And so Bhumisparsha writes, the mind itself is nothing existing in and of itself, but emptiness. It can be illustrated by nothing. Mind is beyond words. Mind is beyond thought, beyond description. It is like space. And so we rest into this and relax in the state without any fabrication. Yeah, this is a good antidote for people who become very enamored by everything they think. Like, oh, my thoughts, my brilliant ideas. Oh, it's a little tricky for some people in some professions, right? Artists, writers, etc. My novel idea. And I'm not trying to be jaded and say there are no novel ideas, right? That's not what I'm saying. But maybe if we can appreciate even more this kind of vast, empty, spacious canvas upon which everything arises, and we're actually able to experience everything much more differently than if we make it about my experience. And then there's pointing out emptiness as spontaneous presence. It's a manifestation, radiance, and unimpededness arise in a diverse way, unmoving from the domain of emptiness. Fulcrum writes that we must understand that there is nothing but emptiness. All appearances, all phenomena of samsara and nirvana are the spontaneous presence of inseparable appearance and emptiness. And again, the whole point here is these things are not meant to just be items of faith. That it's like just because it's written a book doesn't mean you have to just say it is true. The point here, in keeping with this very kind of experiential practice manual, it feeling into this, experiencing it. If this is the case, well, then what is the nature of all of our experience? How much energy are we expending trying to make everything different? A little bit like we find in this Dzogchen text by Tokutsulo that Keith Diamond translated. this kind of description of appearance being that which radiates from our eyes, right? That we are creating this particular kind of play that's happening right now, this play of appearance. Just letting it happen. Where does it come from? It comes from us. Right? All of its qualities come from us. Good, bad, acceptable, unacceptable. And it's interesting, you know, I knew Bokor Rinpoche like pretty well. I, you know, lived outside of his monastery for a number of years in Mirik, near Darjeeling. I probably spent I don't know, 5 or 6 years, you know, going back and forth, sometimes staying for, I mean, a couple times staying for as long as 8 or 9 months at his place. And he was so gentle and impartial to everything, you know, in a very relaxed, easy way. He really didn't have a lot of expectations about things, and not because he didn't think highly of anything. Right? It was more, there was just not a lot of energy invested in everything because everything was just happening, you know. And I think I shared this story once. You know, he and the abbot of his monastery, Kempo Lodrodonyo, who's now kind of the main teacher for Yangti Bokramche's Poku, they were they had a very small monastery in this place called Mungod in Karnataka. Very small, like 2 monks or 3 monks or something like this. And they went down to Mungod to offer some apartments to the Tibetan refugee community there. And on the way back, their plane, they were flying from anyway from Karnataka to Kolkata, and then we was going to fly from Kolkata to Siliguri, and then take the jeep up. And the flight from Kolkata to Siliguri got canceled, and so he and Kempo Lodrodonyo, you know, everybody was like, "Oh, you know, Rinpoche, we'll get you a ticket, you know, on the next flight." And he was like, "I don't care about that. We're gonna take a bus." And the buses then, you know, were pretty just slow and long, and you know, we're gonna get jostled around, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, you know, Rinpoche's in this like bus." And you know, no, he didn't have a cell phone or anything, and neither did Kempo Lodrodonyo. And so I was like, we don't even really know where they are. And it was funny because everybody was so worried and like kind of kind of losing it. And then when they showed up like, you know, they got a taxi themselves to the monastery and all this kind of stuff. And everybody's like, "Oh my God, Rinpoche, you shouldn't have done that." And he's like, "Done what?" Like, you know, I just came, right? Like, um, so anyway, this practice of just letting things be is very hard. Especially if we've been trained to constantly change things. Right. So this point being, this is so important. You know, we must understand that there's nothing but emptiness. All appearances, all phenomena of samsara and nirvana are the spontaneous presence of inseparable appearance and emptiness. Well, this usually causes our ego to bristle quite a bit. You know, have a little bit of a temper tantrum from time to time. No, it can't be. I have to be able to improve everything. I, or I and the people I like. And the fourth and final is additional ways of pointing out self-liberation as spontaneous presence. And so he writes, likewise, appearances, awareness, and emptiness are primordially the spontaneous presence of the union of clarity and emptiness, with no need for antidotes that reject, take, disregard, or establish. This is a self-liberation of reality, the Mahamudra, so the Great Seal. And so I'm going to repeat this one. Likewise, appearances, awareness, and emptiness are primordially the spontaneous presence of the union of clarity and emptiness, with no need for antidotes that reject, take, disregard, or establish. This is a self-liberation of reality, Mahamudra. And so what is being pointed out here is that technically nothing needs to be done. Right? You can let this, there is no agent of transformation here. This too is very hard for people to accept for a lot of reasons, one of which is because I am a meditator and I practice Mahamudra. Right? And so if you practice Mahamudra, let everything self-liberate, because that's what everything is. Everything is already free. We are already free. I remember the first time I ever heard Bokram say this. I also heard it was when I was on the study abroad program in Bodh Gaya. This is the first time I ever saw Bokram in 1995. He came to teach one evening, and he brought this up, and we're all college students, and everyone's like, "Damn, like that's there's nothing we need to do." Right? And there's another person who came through to teach Chökyi Rinpoche, and he said something very similar. He was like, what did he say? He was like, basically like, all of us are Buddhas, we just haven't recognized that yet. Right? There was one person in particular who was like, yeah, it really went to his head. And yeah, but this is an interesting thing. Again, the first few times we hear this, it's both exciting and, part of us is like, well, wait a minute, like, is that true? Like, and rather than, have to look elsewhere, come back to your own practice, right? And let this, see what happens, right? See if it becomes evident. Again, there's nobody who will do this for you. There's no object to buy, no statue to have made, no clothes to wear that make this more one way or another. It just is. So, does anyone have any questions or thoughts, reflections? Yeah, Anne. Oh, you're muted.
It's just a reflection that came to mind about one of the obstacles to experiencing what you're talking about, and that's the belief that we're in control in some way. Mm-hmm. And what the thought was, and I remember a refugee telling me, saying, gosh, we've been in the boat, we've been in the sea, we've been taken to an island, and now we're here. And now I just accept that things kind of turn out because they kind of turn out. And when you've been through enough, you sort of don't think about what you can do to change things. You kind of just accept that things turn out. And to me, in terms of being able to just be with your mind, it's one aspect of giving up that helps to be with your mind. And it was a young person who said this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I do like the use of the term giving up. Yeah, there's like a kind of renunciation aspect to this where we're renouncing needless activity, right?
Mm.
Renouncing kind of the friction and heat of constantly being involved in change making. I mean, you're in New Zealand, right? I'm sorry, Australia.
No, New Zealand, please.
Yeah, there's that my dad, and I was really young when he told me that whole thing about the introduction of all these different species to kind of control pests, and then they breed and they fall out of they come out of control, right? With rabbits and I think with frogs too. Frogs were brought in to eat insects, and then frogs reproduce like crazy, and then they're all over the roads, and people are kind of always running over them and stuff like this. This is a good example of well-meaning desire to want to change things that just create more and more mess, figuratively and literally.
Oh, yes.
You know, yeah.
Yeah.
Antidotes are interesting, right? They're interesting. There's a lot of doing, but and of course, this is not this doesn't have to go so far as Christian Science does, or things like this, or anti-vaxxers who are well, the body has an immune system. Why do we need vaccines, right? We don't have to extend it into the into the world of science and the world of other things, but really just applying this to our own experience of ourselves and that desire to want to be in control. I mean, this is what Antilope's 6 nails, right? Don't control. And this was just hard when we think that we are in control. Renouncing control, is part of this.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions, thoughts? How are you, Tony?
Good. I'm on retreat.
Oh.
I don't know. I had some questions and I kind of answered them for myself. So, but yeah, I'm working with movement and stillness and activity. This feels silly to say, silly coming out of my mouth, but trying to find the difference between what I'm sitting shamatha and when I'm making a meal or something like that. So that's yep, that's how I'm doing, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good. Just bring it into the ordinary, I think that's helpful too, because then we begin to see that not only does practice, apply to everything, but also this idea of it being very ordinary, right? This ordinary mind that's chopping things or making sure I don't burn something or splash stuff or, you know, whatever, or that it tastes good, you know. Yeah.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of along that practical way of moving through the world, but for the most part, I can stay in the spaciousness, whether I'm in traffic or at the market.
Mhm.
But what to do on days when there might be a lot of reactivity around you and it kind of splashes up on you, right? And then I feel less spacious and kind of getting caught into that reactivity. So you used the phrase, the needless activity, which was a good, so, you know, someone next to you is kind of losing their mind in traffic. And 9 times out of 10, like it's kind of joyful and amusing to me, not that they're suffering, but just the activity of, or the energy of that, right? But what happens on those days when that's also irritating to me? That's where I'm like trying to find the patience or the spaciousness around that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I like use the term patience because you know, ultimately this is what we're trying to be able to hone in this practice, right? And the best form of patience is just being with our mind. So I would, and I do, when this happens, try to let go of any particular kind of antidote. Because when we get a little triggered like that, that's kind of our go-to is like, oh wait, how do I make myself feel better? And it's like, okay, this is not what meditation is, right? This is not like meditation is not necessarily a massage or, you know, some kind of thing like this. And there are a couple techniques. I mean, one is to continue to train in just letting go and resting into the experience of what is happening, right? So if it's irritation, that's, you know, the same way like we can have a lot of kind of excessive cogitation, right, of which you could say irritation is connected, right? Because there's a lot happening. Then feeling into that in relationship to awareness, right? That there is actually something much larger, right? That is the container for this very intense thing. And usually when we're able to kind of settle into that, right? Settle into awareness itself, the pointedness of what is being experienced tends to soften, right? Now, if it doesn't, my go-to then is contemplating death and impermanence, right? So when if I get all hot and bothered about something, it's like, Justin, remember, like, your time here is so limited, right? I can like freak out about everything, you know, left, right, and center, in front of me, behind me, etc. But sometimes I will. And when I do, then, you know, it's like, oh, you know, is this, you know, is this the use of time that I want to be spending, right? This very precious time. Then the other thing is, you know, sometimes it is helpful. It doesn't, you know, it can feel a little abstract in the beginning, but it's worth everybody kind of feeling into this. You know, this last instruction about everything, I would say second to last, that everything that arises is the nature of emptiness, right? And then that also tends to allow me the space to just be like, this is some weird emptiness, right? Like whatever the situation is, or no matter how frustrating it is, or humorous it is, or, you know, irksome, right? That, you know, the options are I could get hot and bothered and be unskillful in my being hot and unbothered, or I can, right, take responsibility for my own reactivity in the moment. Right, because this is part of it too. Is like, this is ultimately like about breaking a habit. The habit is I feel in relationship to all these other things, and therefore whatever comes next, right? And we can and this comes into this last instruction about the self-liberation piece. We can feel and then begin to align with the recognition of how things self-liberate because they are empty in and of themselves. Sometimes the best way to do this is to begin to feel into, like, where is my frustration coming from? And obviously, the first thing is that guy over there, or whatever the situation is. But when we look more deeply, usually the experience is gone, right? Or we do still, it shifts, and it usually shifts this way, and then from there softens, But this is the thing, right? Like when, Bokramche says, and he's not the only one because he's ultimately commenting on this text by Eth Karapa. That it's beyond words means it's beyond antidotes too, which means, like the only way to kind of get through this is to practice more. The same way my wife is a great baker. I'm a terrible baker. I'm a terrible baker because I've had a few disasters, and I'm like, I give up. I can't, I don't like this, right? But she is like, okay, that didn't turn out the way I wanted to, but I want to get better, right? With baking, I'm like, no, baking and I don't mix. Like I'm scared of it. Right, and so this process of just getting to understand the way a particular oven works, getting to understand, all the different things allows you to become better at this. It's the same with our own mind. Ekta or Alia, do you have any questions or thoughts or reflections?
Yeah, I was just
No?
I think there were a couple of things I was thinking about. Me and my partner, we went to this nature reserve area the other day, and he had forgotten the tickets. So he was standing there on his phone looking for his tickets, and I could sense he was getting really frustrated. I was like, "You all right? Do you need my help?" And he was like, "No." So I thought, okay, I'm not going to trigger this situation. I can see he's getting impatient. So I thought I'll walk away. And then it ended up in a bit of an argument because he was like, "Oh, you were activating me by asking me." Right. And I thought my skillful response to that situation was to just dissolve it. I went away and I stood by a tree and I was staring into the sky. And I was just thinking, actually, maybe deep down in me, there was a bit of frustration and impatience with him. And that wasn't a skillful way of tending to that situation. And then I was thinking about another thing that happened the other day. I went to get another tattoo, and I was just really aware of how the environment is built up to distract from pain. So like there's this loud music going on, there's like all these walls full of paintings, and the guy is talking to me. And it's interesting what you just said there, that not to use meditation as an antidote. So I was like, okay, just focus on the sensation. It's just pain, it's going to pass. Like, I've done it before, it's not a big deal. But then I could really see my mind jumping between all of these things, like the pain, the music, the conversation, the art on the wall. And it was just a really interesting experience in watching my mind do two things. One was to try to apply the Dharma like an antidote, and then the other one was to try to rest in awareness of this whole sort of almost chaotic scene, really. And it was just really interesting walking away from that with that sort of sense of adrenaline rush and mental exhaustion from battling with it all. But by the end of the like 3-4 hour session, when I was saying about, or when you I think were saying about giving up, it became easier when I just gave in to all of it and just let all of it just be, just let the music be. I had no control over some of the music, which was really terrible. I had no control over the pain of what the guy was saying. And it became a pleasant experience for the last hour when I was just like, okay, this is just what it is. Just gotta let it all be what it is. So yeah, those things were coming to mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you paint a very vivid picture of, actually, interestingly enough, of how similar tattoo parlors are in that way, right? It's kind of like, you know, they've got all those things, like check, like all the different stuff on the walls, music that you can't pick. It's intense tattoo artists, like pain, sounds, all that stuff. It's interesting though with the first thing that you brought up, like, you know, with your partner, and this is interesting. Like I've watched, you know, my root teacher, right? And you know, was a mother, and I'm close with her daughter, and there were several times where, you know, we would all be together, and then, you know, a mother-daughter situation would arise, right? And my root teacher's daughter would get, you know, frustrated by something, and Anizangmo would often just kind of let each of us sit in our frustration, right? She would either leave the room or something, right? And we're so, you know, I don't know if it's like because we organize ourselves this way or have these expectations, but we do have these expectations sometimes that our partners are going to, or people we're, you know, intimately connected with, are just going to kind of make us feel better in these kinds of moments of like, I could totally identify with him, like searching through emails to try and find the ticket, and it's like, I don't know where it is, so, you know, which email folder, blah, blah, blah. And I admire your just like, this is his thing. Right? Like, I mean, this is his experience of mind in the moment with his phone, and he doesn't want anybody here to help, so, you know, deal. And then also the kind of interesting aspect of like, you know, how that shifted into like a bit of an argument too, right? Like, this is the weird thing about this is like we develop an ethical imperative around helping others, right? And yet these things we really can't help anyone with, right? Sometimes the most compassionate thing is just letting people like hit that wall, you know, because like it's my stuff that I'm hitting, right? I'm hitting my, like, you know, the disconnect between, you know, for example, you know, if one's a practitioner, the nature of mind and appearance being self-liberated, and my, you know, whatever is impeding my recognition of that, right? And in that moment, I get increasingly frustrated, but it's really like, this is something we all need to kind of work through, you know. And so where I'm going with this is like, sometimes compassion includes letting people go through their hard thing, you know, and not stepping in and intervening. Because sometimes the intervention, even though it could be well intended, sometimes though it's not, right? Sometimes it's actually force of habit, you know, because I want to avoid an argument, or I want to avoid somebody's intensity or something like this, right? And so that's worth feeling into too, you know. Like, I think maybe all of us, theoretically, I don't know if this is true, but all of us can probably point to something that maybe our parents made us just go through and didn't come and help with, right? Not because they were uncaring or sociopathic, but because, like, part of parenting or child rearing is like supporting your children in learning. And it's not all book learning, right? It's kind of like, learning. But I have a really weird story. A friend of mine, I went to like elementary school, middle school, and high school with. He was being bullied, and his his father pushed him out the door with a baseball bat and was like, "You go solve your bully problems." So that was like a bad example of this, but like just letting your loved one or friend or whomever like have their freak out, and also hold that with spaciousness. Like we can hold them with compassion and be like, oh, they really hit their wall. I'll let them go through their whole thing until then it's time for me to kind of like say, hey, if you want to get like some ice cream or something, and just like change the dynamic that way. Yeah, I think this is what Trungpa was talking about, like with this idea of like idiot compassion, right? It's a compassion that's just way so soft that we can label it as beneficial, but is it really? Kind of like unexamined compassion. And the same goes for ourselves, right? Like with instructions like these, they can be frustrating because we meet ourselves and we meet our kind of limitation from time to time. And again, if we're going to be engaged in self-care by giving up meditation for a while, that's not particularly compassionate, right? Sometimes sitting with that. There's a story of Bokor Rinpoche. I never really got a full I never got a description from him of this, but many other people around him told me the story about how he almost lost his mind in one of his like long retreats. And at first, the first time I heard that, I was like, oh my God, like this is weird. Like I thought, these people are supposed to be perfect, And then, the more you meditate, then you're like, oh, I totally see how this could happen, right? Like totally intense. But it's the experience of difficulty in meditation is not a bad thing. In fact, all of us at some point or another are going to kind of hit a kind of wall, or two or three. And, just remembering that like anything else, you can hit a little pause button, care for yourself, come back, right? But not to give up. Ekta, did you have anything?
I've been doing pretty good lately. Like it's a very tough time, but considering that, I have been doing so well in the last little few days. So for me, Mahamudra is showing up in choosing ease, in choosing, instead of resisting, like Alia was saying, instead of resisting and trying to make it better, I've just decided to surrender. Like I have so much stress, my jaw clicks. Like I don't know if you'll notice, but even when I'm sitting, my jaw will just be clicking and it's all kinds of crazy things happening. And I'm just like, so when I notice it, I'm just going to be like, oh, clicking, notice it, and then it stops. I have decided that I am going to go to bed at 9, like get into bed at 9, because that's very supportive of me. So I do my Palan Lama practice. And I get a kick out of it. It's light outside and I'll draw my shades and, and just say, okay, now it's time to be. And everything that is actually considered a distraction or a bad thing or an unproductive thing, I've been telling myself, I choose this. So if I'm distracted, I'll be like, okay, I'm choosing to scroll. I'm choosing to do this. And then it stops because I think there is a part of me that enjoys the rebellion and then enjoys the guilt and then enjoys the shame. And there is this cycle. But when I just say, I choose this, it's like, it's boring. I don't want to do it anymore. And then I can settle. So even when I meditate, like sometimes I notice my body just can't sit still. So I use like a yoga position, I use a little bit of movement, and then it's like, okay, fine, like you are going towards the movement, I'm going to bring you back to stillness. Like it's just this monkey mind or this childish mind or this agitated mind, ordinary mind, whatever we want to call it, is like enjoying this non-judgment that I am offering it, and it's bringing with it so much ease. So I may not be in stillness, but I am at peace. And I love that today you were talking about that, like that movement is inherently liberated, because I'm tired of, like, I cannot relate, not tired, I cannot relate to any of this stuff about settling my mind in this Buddha-like posture. That's just not me. What does someone with ADHD combined with menopause, combined with acute stress is supposed to do? You know, like I cannot have that Buddha-like experience. So in that sitting posture, so how do I bring the Buddha-like experience to what is? And it's been very, very enjoyable. So I get up, and while making my tea, I listen to an audiobook, and the bliss that is just bursting forth. And my partner is seeing the benefit of this. Arrested Ekta is apparently incredible. So that's Mahamudra, right? Like, and there's pleasure and there's relief and there's ease and there's like, yeah, I won't write. I won't do this. I won't do that. And I'll go to bed at 9 a.m., 9 p.m. And it's amazing. Sleeping 8 hours while having, when my hormones are like this is unheard of, but it's been working. And I've learned that the trick for that is to get into bed at 9. And initially I was like, how can I go to bed when it's daylight outside? And now I'm like, yes, I feel like this is the rebellion. Like I'm changing as a person, still rebelling, but in a way that is supportive of what my eventual goal is, or my momentary. Wow, my eventual goal and my momentary goal is the same, which is to be liberated. And so that liberates me. So yeah, this is very simple, but it's where I am and I enjoy it.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just listening, it's like such an easy thing to say, but it's hard to do sometimes. It's like listening to, body, listening to mind, listening to relationship between phenomena and oneself, all of this. These practices are very gentle, kind of at their core, And I think it takes a little bit of time to settle into that too, to settle into a relationship to these kinds of practices, because we're so used to doing, right? Do. Yeah, thank you. So maybe we can pause here. We're a little over time. It is my fault. But I'm enjoying myself. So I hope you're enjoying yourselves too. Let's dedicate the merit very briefly, so that all this work of deeply understanding the nature of mind, the nature of awareness, and this union of awareness and emptiness is able to be innate, relaxed, and ordinary. And may the recognition and the realization that arises from this be able to aid us in helping to liberate ourselves and others. May all beings benefit. May all beings benefit. Yeah. Thank you all. Take very good care. Have a good rest of your retreat, Tony.